Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Today, we are going over players that, number one, I would be buying into. Number two, I would be staying away from. And number three, a couple players that are just victims to the situation that they are stuck in right now. We're starting this one off with Bijan Robinson. But before we do that, I want to quickly ask you guys if you'd hit that subscribe button for me. We're on the road to 3,000, and I appreciate all the support lately. Also, at the end of the video, drop a thumbs up. Bijan Robinson, though. The fact of the matter is that Bijan has looked great almost every single game that he's been out there on the field. But people are starting to get a little bit antsy. I realize why, because he was a first-round draft pick in fantasy football. So you're expecting this guy to get over 20 fantasy points every single game in PPR leagues, probably. That's just not going to happen most games unless you're on an offense like Christian McCaffrey on the 49ers or your Tyreek Hill on the Dolphins or certain players like that. The Falcons are not an offense like the 49ers or the Dolphins right now. All right, Bijan is averaging at the moment 16.4 PPR fantasy points, which is good enough for top 10 in the league at the position. All right, while it's certainly frustrating watching him only get 3.3 average yards per carry against the Houston Texans, who do not have the best defense in the world, these games are going to happen. This is bound to happen now and again. Take a look at Christian McCaffrey this week against the Dallas Cowboys. This was his first kind of dud week of the entire year as the number one running back, even having a down game. Like I said, this is bound to happen every now and again. Another reason that people might be panicking on Bijan Robinson right now is that Algier last Sunday saw just 14 less snaps and actually had more carries than Bijan Robinson. The reason that I think Bijan wasn't nearly as effective as he was in past games, at least in PPR scoring formats, is that he only caught 2 passes while he normally averages more than 4 every single game. So this was just an outlier game, just a down week for him. While his schedule isn't amazing, I will say in the short term, later on in the fantasy playoffs, he goes against the Panthers, the Colts, and the Bears, which you absolutely love. That's a great fantasy playoff schedule. Buy low on Bijan before it's too late. Next up, we have Devonte Smith. And you could tell that in this game against the Browns on Sunday, Devonte Smith just happened to be the odd man out in this Eagles offense. A lot of his targets were uncatchable balls, and boy, was he not happy on the sidelines. I completely understand. He is a top-tier wide receiver in this league, and he expects to get the ball just a bit less, if not equally as much as A.J. Brown does on the opposite side of the field. The fact of the matter is that this Eagles offense, though, is just so good. They have so many options. Dallas Goedert, DeAndre Swift, A.J. Brown. They all have to get the ball on a weekly basis. Goddard finally had a good game on Sunday against the Rams. He's been struggling all season long. Swift had a nice game, and so did A.J. Brown, but Devonte Smith just happened to not have a good game today. I said this in the How to Fix My Fantasy Football Team video. I would be trading into good offenses and trading out of bad offenses. This Eagles offense is certainly very good. I would definitely be trading for Devonte Smith right now. Also, I'm really expecting that once Philly gets into the heart of the schedule here, once they start in week 7 against the Miami Dolphins, that Devonte Smith is going to be way more involved in this offense. Do not trade him for scraps right now. Do not be panicking on Devonte Smith just yet. Next up, we have Kiron Williams. I will say the Kiron Williams workload dominance continued on Sunday against the Eagles. He was on the field for 47 out of a possible 56 offensive snaps in this game and ran 33 routes. The main problem in this game is that Philly just dominated the time of possession, leaving the Rams with only 22 minutes to work, while I believe Philly had 37 minutes on offense. Another huge problem, of course, was that this Eagles defensive line, we weren't expecting him to have a great game going into this one. The defensive line on the Eagles is one of the best in the entire game, so Kiron didn't have much room to run. However, it is very promising that he still averaged 4.1 yards per carry in this game. I'd say going forward, his matchups are much better. He goes against the Cardinals in week number 6, and I'm expecting him to have another breakout game in this one. If he's going to control the workload this heavily over Ronnie Rivers every single week, and the Rams offense is continuing to look good, they just got Cooper Kupp back. Puka Nacua is looking good. Their passing game is working. They need to get their running game a little bit more involved in this offense. I would be buying low on Williams because most weeks his floor is so high. He goes out for so many passes. There's so many chances for him to get the ball in his hands. It'll eventually all come together for him. Okay, this feels like a very similar situation to week number 3 when he struggled against the Cincinnati Bengals, and we talked about him. We said he was going to explode next week, and he did. He went for 2 touchdowns. I think he had 28 PPR fantasy points. So definitely buy low on Kiron Williams. By the way, I just used that week number 3 game as an example right there. I'm not saying I'm right on every decision. I'm certainly not. Just take that into account there. Next up, we have Brandon Aiyuk. I will say this was a very impressive statement game by the 49ers, 42-10 on Sunday night against the Dallas Cowboys. While Aiyuk was on the field for 56 out of a possible 71 snaps, the wide receivers really didn't have to run too many routes in this one because they were dominating the entire time. There was only 28 total routes run by wide receivers, and Aiyuk actually led that category with 24 routes ran in that one. So far into the year, if I had to redraft, take my choice of either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Aiyuk. Right now, I'm leaning Aiyuk. Okay, all of his stats will go up from his week 5 totals. There's no doubt in my mind when the game is not a blowout, he's going to be getting more receptions than that. All right, the one good takeaway from this game, though, is that Aiyuk still managed to get 7 targets in a game where he only ran 24 routes. That's over a 25% target share on his routes. All right, that's an elite level usage on one of the top scoring offenses in the NFL right now. Next up, we have Jonathan Taylor. Now, it was talked about before week 5 even started that Jonathan Taylor's snap count was going to be limited. That was certainly true. All right, he was only on the field for 10 out of a possible 66 snaps on offense and could only sit there and watch as Zach Moss put on an absolute masterclass in that backfield. All right, this was also against one of the tougher rushing defenses in the NFL against the Tennessee Titans. All right, he ended up with 23 carries, 165 yards, ended up with 2 touchdowns and 33.5 PPR fantasy points. I know Jonathan Taylor owners are just sitting there absolutely sick that it wasn't JT that was going off if they put him in their lineups. All right. This Colts offensive line so far this year has looked a lot better than expected. And so far, Zach Moss is getting a crazy workload right now. That will eventually be Jonathan Taylor's role. You just have to be a little bit more patient with him. Give him like 2 more weeks, and I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be back and performing great again. So buy low on him if you can get him. Next up is Isaiah Pacheco. I will say Pacheco has been looking great so far this year, but he could have had a better game against the Minnesota Vikings. He ended up with 13.4 PPR fantasy points, but he did find the end zone in this one, which was definitely reassuring. He's now scored in 3 straight games for the first time in his entire career and has seen over 15 carries in each of those games. The one downside with Pacheco is that they love to use Jerick McKinnon and Edwards-Helaire in this offense as well. If he had more carries up towards that 20 to 25 carry mark per game, I'd be feeling a little bit more confident about him, and he was in for more pass catching role. But he has been getting a decent amount of looks out of the backfield these past couple of weeks, so I really can't complain. The real reason that I like Pacheco, though, is because of his schedule heading forward. The only tough matchups in terms of run defense right now, if I take a look at the schedule, seems to be the Eagles and the Patriots. The Buffalo Bills just gave up a ton of rushing yards to Travis Etienne on Sunday, so I'm not really counting them as the best run defense at the moment. But if you're in need of a solid running back number 2, go out and get Pacheco right now before it's too late. He will help you win your fantasy leagues. Next up, we have TJ Hockenson. I can't lie to you guys. This Vikings offense right now is pretty atrocious to watch, especially with Justin Jefferson having that hamstring injury and heading to IR these next couple of weeks, most likely. TJ Hockenson, Jordan Addison, and KJ Osborne are going to have to step up into that role. With there only being a handful of good tight ends in this league, like I've been talking about in recent videos, Hockenson is one of the most consistent that there is. So far, he's only seen under 8 targets in one singular game and only scored less than 10 PPR fantasy points in one game as well. These past few games, Kirk Cousins really hasn't had any time to throw in the pocket. He's just getting blasted back there. All right, the offensive line is just not holding up. If the pocket collapses quickly, especially with Justin Jefferson gone in these next couple of weeks, I would really expect his first read most times to beat TJ Hockenson because he is such a reliable option for him and has been in the past. Week number 6 against the Chicago Bears, by the way, will be a good test to see if their O-line can hold up against kind of not so good defensive lines. And I'm really looking for Kirk Cousins and TJ Hockenson to kind of get back on track in this game. Next up, we have Cam Akers. Akers bumped up his usage from 14 snaps in week number 4 to 21 snaps in week number 5, while Madison's snap count was slowly eaten into yet again. I know Madison got into the end zone in this game against the Chiefs, which is cool and all, but if it wasn't for that play, he's sitting at 6.6 PPR fantasy points. Not anything to be excited about. All right. He was supposed to be the workhorse running back on this team, but instead they went out. They didn't really trust him enough to have him be the lone back, so they went out and got Cam Akers. Another thing working against not only Madison, but also Akers right now is, like we talked about, this offensive line has not been holding up so far. Not getting a ton of holes to be ran through right now at the moment. If I had to choose the rest of the season, I would be picking Akers over Madison still. Moving on to Terry McLaurin. A really rough game against the Bears on Thursday night. Only ended up with 4 catches for 49 yards. But honestly, it could have been a lot worse. McLaurin was held to just 1 catch until very late in this game and might have finished there if it wasn't for the Commanders being down so much to the Bears. And the bottom line is that the Commanders team overall, they're not very good. All right, they are just not very good. They will be trailing in a lot of games this year, but the thing is the offensive line hasn't looked good either. So will Sam Howell have enough time to get the ball off is the main question. If so, his main option right now is still Terry McLaurin in my eyes. And then a close second, I will say Curtis Samuel coming on. I like a lot of things about Curtis Samuel. I think he is clearly taken over that number 2 role from Jahan Dotson. I don't know what's going on with him. All right, Sam Howell still never looking for Jahan Dotson. As the rest of the season goes on, I wouldn't be worried about Terry McLaurin whatsoever. He's been very consistent every year of his career with so many different quarterbacks. This situation should be no different here. Next up, we have Nico Collins. Boom, he booms and then he busts, and he booms and then he busts. All right, what can you really expect out of Nico Collins going up against AJ Terrell the entire game? All right, not too much. This Falcons team has a great passing defense, and Nico Collins was held to just 3 catches for 39 yards on Sunday. Collins is going to be drawing the number 1 cornerback most games just because he's simply started off this season so damn hot. All right, he's had games where he's exploded, and then he's had a couple duds mixed in here and there, as we all know. So what I would plan for going forward is if the opposing team has an elite cornerback who's going to be shadowing Nico Collins, maybe don't play him in that game. All right, but if he goes against a bottom-ranked defense, CJ Stroud can get the passing game going, I would definitely be starting him on a weekly basis. Right now is a great time to be investing in Nico Collins simply because his potential for the rest of the season is so dang high. CJ Stroud has already proved that he's at least a top 15 quarterback, if not top 10 quarterback in this league, which means points are not going to be too hard to come by for this Houston Texans team. Another factor working in Collins' favor is that the offensive line is kind of breaking down, not giving a lot of running room for Damen Pierce and Devin Singletary, and they are going to have to pass. Even if this team is winning in games, they're still going to have to pass because the run game has been so ineffective so far up to this point. Next up, Jake Ferguson. Once again, this game was an absolute blowout the entire time by the 49ers, 42-10. That being said, Ferguson played on just as many snaps as Ceedee Lamb did. He also ran 73% of routes, which is the most that he has run all season long. Ferguson, out of all the tight ends, he is one of the most reliable tight ends in football. So going forward, I would just hope that the Cowboys, don't blow anybody out and they are in some close games. All right, they don't get blown out, or they don't blow anybody out and they're just in some close games. That's really all you can ask for this Cowboys team. And then Tony Pollard will do better, Jake Ferguson will do better, and so will Ceedee Lamb. Now we're going to move on to some players that I would be a bit cautious about, starting with James Cook. While James Cook was on the field against the Jags for 3 times the amount of plays as any other running back on the Bills, he failed to produce any sort of ground game going. All right, Cook ran just 5 times for -4 yards, but he kind of saved his day, I will say, with the passing work, 3 catches for 25 yards. Still not a great game by any means. The reason that I'm so cautious with Cook heading forward is mainly because the Bills love to pass the ball a ton, but we knew this before the season started. Cook is not getting quite as much passing work that we would have hoped, though. All right, you never really know, on the other hand, how many carries he's actually going to get on a gamely basis. All right, it could be under 10, it could be just over 10, but he's not going to be a guy that gets 20 to 25 carries per game like some of these other running backs in the league. That's just really not going to happen. And the other fact of the matter is that he doesn't get too many goal line opportunities. That's why they have Latavius Murray and Damen Harris there. Now, I talked about him after the past few good games that he's had, saying that I would be selling high on James Cook. At the moment, after that game on Sunday, I don't know if you can really sell him anymore without getting crap in return. So I would be holding on to James Cook as like a kind of a low-end flex play week to week with, a good amount of upside though. Next up, we have Miles Sanders. All right, this was a very tough game on Sunday for Miles Sanders once again against the Lions. They do have a good run defense, I will not lie, but it's not that he was really ineffective on the ground, but he only saw 7 carries for a total of 32 yards and no passing work whatsoever. No passes heading his way. That lack of passing work is my main reason for concern with Miles Sanders, considering the first 4 games, he had at least 3 catches in all of those contests. All right, another stat to note is that Sanders played less snaps than Chuba Hubbard and got less carries in this game. I don't think Sanders' role is going to completely go away in this offense with how much money they paid the guy, but I do expect Chuba Hubbard to be eating into his role constantly throughout the rest of this year. More of a running back by committee sort of thing where Chuba Hubbard plays on more of the passing downs, I would say. I don't know. I don't really want anything to do with this backfield right now, to be honest with you. Next up, we got RaAndre Stevenson. I will say these next couple of players that I'm going to mention, including Stevenson, are just straight up running behind poor offensive lines and haven't had any holes to go through. Right now, though, the Patriots can't sustain any drives. No receivers are getting involved, and the line absolutely collapses almost immediately. And as a result of this, they can't even sniff the red zone. But last season, we saw RaAndre getting a ton of passing work, an elite level of passing work for a running back. This year, that is just not translated at all. In week number 5, they were, of course, trailing the entire game. Ezekiel Elliott had more targets than RaAndre and the same amount of carries. I don't know. It's kind of mind-boggling to me how you can just fall off that quickly. The entire offense looks like absolute crap. All right, they look horrible. 3 points is all they can muster up. They can't even sniff the end zone, like I'm saying. So how can you really sit there and confidently play RaAndre Stevenson at this point? I don't know. I don't know. Next up, we have Damen Pierce. All right, Damen Pierce is another guy who is really struggling only because of the offensive line issues right here. The guy is a fabulous runner, but you couldn't really tell because the offensive line isn't giving him any holes. All right, the positives for Damen Pierce right now is that he's getting most of the work in the backfield, at least having 14 carries in his last 4 games. And this offense is clicking right now in the passing game. So maybe as this season goes on, Damen Pierce finds more gaps in the defense because that defense has to plan more around the passing game and stopping CJ Stroud. But the negatives are that down the line, the schedule gets really brutal for Damen Pierce as he goes against the Titans 2 times and then the Cleveland Browns in your fantasy playoffs. I don't love that whatsoever. But up until that point, he should be just a fine option in my eyes. Next up, we have Naji Harris. This season has just been absolutely dreadful for Harris and pretty forgettable for the Steelers team as a whole, except they're 3-2 somehow. I really don't know how they're pulling this off. Mike Tomlin is an absolute wizard at going positive in the regular season. The past game against the Ravens, Naji averaged just 2.6 yards per carry on 14 attempts and only scored 5.0 PPR fantasy points. He is extremely close to that spot of being just droppable off my roster at this point in time. I would definitely consider dropping him if I had him on my team. I don't have him on any teams, luckily, so I don't have to go through that. But let me know what you guys are thinking in the comment section below about Naji right now. This offensive line, it does not look good at all. He isn't involved in the passing game, and Jaylen Warren is getting a ton of work alongside him. Although Naji outsnapped Warren on Sunday against the Ravens 37-32 in week 5, Warren was still much more effective in that game. Not sure if they're ever really going to fully make the switch to Jaylen Warren as the starter, at least this year, but I would definitely consider it if I was the Steelers because he just looks so much better at the moment. Next up, we have Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is currently receiving the most targets on this team on a weekly basis, so you're probably thinking, all right, we'll take that every day of the week. But the thing is, my problem isn't with Garrett Wilson. It's actually with Zach Wilson and how consistent he can be as a player. It looks like a little bit more of a fluke against the Chiefs, that game that he had, so I don't really know what to make of this. Don't get me wrong, I'm definitely rooting for Zach Wilson, and I'm rooting for Garrett Wilson to succeed this season. I keep saying don't trade into bad offenses, though, and this might be a clear example of doing that. I wouldn't be going out of my way to get Garrett Wilson right now, but I also wouldn't be, dishing him off my team for scraps. I think he's like a flex play with wide receiver 2 upside right now. One good thing about the Jets offense, though, this Sunday against the Broncos, that Breece Hall finally got going. Hopefully that continues over the course of the season pretty much. Next up is Courtland Sutton. I know Courtland Sutton has been super consistent over the first 4 weeks of the season, but week number 5, he dropped an unbearable fantasy performance. You wouldn't even have known that Courtland Sutton was on the field in this game against the New York Jets on Sunday until the 4th quarter of the game, where he finally got a catch for 13 yards. And although the Jets have a good defense, you can't just completely disappear for the entire game against any team, no matter who it is. All right. The good news is that he was on the field for just as many snaps as Jerry Jeudy. The bad news is obviously he didn't perform quite as well as Jerry Jeudy in that game. The next 3 games are also very rough for the Broncos. They go up against the Chiefs 2 times, then the Green Bay Packers in those games. So kind of lower your expectations for Courtland Sutton. If you can ship him off your team, I don't know if I would do it just yet because he had such a bad week. You're probably not going to get too much in return for him. But if he has some good weeks in the future, I'd probably get him off my team. And to close out this video, I want to talk about a couple situational issues that I see with certain players, starting with Tony Pollard. All right, as we talked about with Jake Ferguson early on in this video, this was lopsided the entire time. All right, the 49ers put an absolute beatdown on the Cowboys. As long as the Cowboys are in somewhat close games, Tony Pollard should be a good fantasy football option. I don't even know if that's possible, though, at the moment, if they can stay in close games. Either they're getting blown out or their defense just stops everybody and they can't move the ball. All I'm asking for is some close games so we can properly assess Tony Pollard, Ceedee Lamb, and Jake Ferguson's value. That's all we want. All right, keep the games close, Dallas. Next up is Chris Olave. Derek Carr being hurt is really putting a damper on Olave's fantasy value right now. Kamara and Michael Thomas right now are clearly the main beneficiaries of Derek Carr being hurt. All right, Olave isn't getting nearly as much love as those 2 guys are, but he's still playing the most team snaps almost every single week, and I would still be buying low into Chris Olave so that when Derek Carr is fully healthy, he's going to go off again for you. It's only a matter of time. And last but not least is also Ceedee Lamb. The Dak Prescott issue is the main thing that we got to talk about right here. Dak is killing Ceedee Lamb's value at the moment. His value is currently so low after having multiple bad performances in a row. I think you just have to hold tight on Ceedee Lamb. Don't be selling this guy for nothing as well as Tony Pollard. He falls into the same category for me. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure, as always, to drop a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you are new, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.